What's going on, AP World? We have a list of writings, authors, and messages of those writings that you must know to succeed on your APUSH exam. Guaranteed you will see many of these writings on your exam in some way, shape, or form. So let's get started. All right, we're going to focus on two books from the 18th century, so the 1700s that you must know. First one is a pamphlet titled Common Sense by a man by the name of T-Paine. Yeah! Oh, that was a terrible T-Paine impression. But here's Thomas Paine. And the message of this book was that the U.S. should break away from Great Britain. It should declare its independence, and this was written in 1776. He said that King George III is a bad leader, and this helped influence the Declaration of Independence. This was written to help influence those that were on the fence about breaking away. A couple years later, the late 1780s, we have something called the Federalist Papers, written by three very famous people. Alexander Hamilton right here, John Jay over here, who becomes the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, and James Madison. And the purpose of these articles were to gain support for the ratification of the Constitution. It was a series of 80-something articles, and the whole purpose was to have people support for states to support the ratification of the Constitution. All right, from 1800 to 1850, we have a whole bunch of writings, and one of the big abolitionist writings of this time period is something called The Liberator, and it starts in 1831, and it will continue for 34 years until 1865. It is by this man, William Lloyd Garrison. It was a weekly newspaper. Two terms you'll want to know. He called for an immediate and uncompensated end to slavery, so he wanted slavery to end immediately or right away, and he did not want slave owners to get paid for this. Democracy in America in 1835 by Alexis de Tocqueville, and he said that Americans are unique and a lack of an aristocracy or like a really wealthy class helped forge the American identity. So Americans are unique, and not having an aristocracy helped them develop a unique identity. One of the more famous writings in history is Civil Disobedience, or On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, by Henry David Thoreau. This was written in 1849. This was written in opposition to the Mexican-American War. He was against it and did not feel that his taxes should have to go to pay for the Mexican-American War. This later influenced Gandhi and Martin Luther King, two very important people who got their ideas from Henry David Thoreau. He's got a sweet beard, too. Look at that thing. 1850 to 1900, we're going to see more writings. Things are really heating up here. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote something called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she was from Cincinnati, too, in case you did not know that. And this exposed the harshness of slavery to many Northerners, and the theme of this book was the breakup of slave families. So when slaves were bought and sold, it focused on the actual family being broken up and the effects of that. And this helped influence the Civil War. Very, very, very important to know that. 1881, we have another important book that APUSH loves for you guys to know. It is called A Century of Dishonor by Helen Hunt Jackson. Here she is. And basically, she looked at the past 100 years or so of the U.S. government and their relationships with Native Americans. And she said that the federal government constantly betrayed the Native Americans, whether it's from violating treaties, forcing them to move, wars with them, battles, you name it. In 1890, we have an admiral by the name of Alfred T. Mahan, an admiral in the Navy, and he read something called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. He says that control of the sea was vital to world dominance. If you wanted to be a big, strong, powerful country, you had to have control of the sea. This encouraged the U.S. to build up its navy in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and that navy will come into play in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. How the Other Half Lives, Jacob Riis in 1890. He was a photojournalist, and here's one of the most famous pictures that he took. This was a series of photos that he would take to show the poor living conditions of immigrants in New York City. So this will lead to some reform movements during the Progressive Era. The Frontier Thesis by Frederick Jackson Turner was written in 1893, and he looked at the 1890 census and said that the frontier line essentially ended. It was no longer discernible. So this magical line separating east from west that people could always move to in times of crisis, that's a safety valve theory that people can move out there and make money, that is essentially gone after 1890. And he also said that the frontier helped promote democracy in America. Couple books between 1900 and 1950 you'll need to know. The Jungle, Upton Sinclair, probably the most well-known book out of all these books that I've listed. People just have a good background. It exposed the horrific conditions in the meatpacking industry, particularly in Chicago. And why we care about the jungle is it led to the passage of two very important acts, the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. This is incredible that this book was published in 1906 and two laws were passed in that same year in response to this. Teddy Roosevelt read this book, horrified by what was going on. Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is written in 1939, and this focuses on those that were affected by the Dust Bowl when they were forced to leave to California. So this little red area up here, that is the Dust Bowl. And it was a combination of just drought and really bad weather conditions for farmers, mostly in Oklahoma. Okies, as they were called, and they had to leave to California because they simply could not live there anymore. 1950 to 2000, we're finishing up with about 4 books you need to know. On the Road by Jack Kerouac was written in 1957. He was part of a movement called the Beat Generation of the 1950s, the Beat Writers. They appear quite often, and there's a similar group from the 1920s called the Lost Generation. But the Beat Generation rejected middle class values such as materialism. So basically, they're just talking about how this idea that people should just continue to buy more and have all these material goods. Jack Kerouac rejected that idea. He didn't like it. Rachel Carson, if there is a writer that AP loves more than Rachel Carson, I would love to know. In 1962, she wrote a book called Silent Spring, which brought awareness to the environmental problems going on in the United States, especially when it comes to contamination and pesticides and all that stuff. And this helped start the environmental movement. You must know Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, which is a book about the environment. The Feminine Mystique is another very popular book by Betty Friedan, and this brought attention to challenges that women faced in the 50s and 60s, especially when they were expected to be housewives. So again, this idea that's been around forever of cult of domesticity, that women are just supposed to stay home, and Betty Friedan wrote about that. And this helped increase enrollment in the women's rights movement of the 1960s. Finally, we'll finish up with Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was arrested, and he wrote this letter to fellow white clergymen and basically took his ideas and Gandhi's and Thoreau's belief in civil disobedience and explained why he was doing what he was doing. And he said it is the duty of people to disobey unjust laws to bring attention, and that's the way that laws will change. I threw a lot of writings at you today. Please take time to study these. You will see them on your APUSH exam. Please subscribe if you have not already. Help spread the word. Thomas Paine even thinks it's common sense to spread the word. How can you disagree with T. Paine? If you have any comments, questions, please feel free to leave them in the bottom. And that's it for me. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.